And this is why I told you that we should have left the house at least 4 hours before we actually did. I let out an exasperated sigh and shot a glance into the passenger seat where a pair of blue eyes glowered back at me. Look, let's not fight right now, Paula, okay? It's late, and we're both tired. Let's not start off our first ever vacation to Vegas by turning into a bitter old couple. We've only been married for what, 2 days and change? For a moment, the eyes continued to try and pierce my skin. And then they closed as my wife let out a sigh of her own, nodding. You're right, I'm sorry. Just having to look at nothing but desert for the last 5 or 6 hours kind of got to me. She shot me a look that conveyed equal parts love and mild irritation. And if someone didn't insist on holding on to an almost 30-year-old BMW and listened to me on getting a new one with a navigation system, we wouldn't have gotten turned around on those side roads and ended up almost driving to LA. I let out a soft laugh. Paula Clemens, you knew damn well when you married me that I'm not the kind of man who sells something that works perfectly well just to have something new and flashy and end up with 70 years of debt jammed onto my shoulders. She snorted. Yes, I most certainly did, honey. She reached around the center console and stroked a finger across my cheek. Just count yourself lucky I find you cute, with a good sense of humor. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put up with it for the last 5 years, let alone married you, she said teasingly. I laughed loudly. I love you too. Giving a small, sly smile to show that she was satisfied with our little quip. She leaned forward and pulled a rather battered road map from the glove compartment. Paula and I had met each other over 6 years ago to the day, and to sum it up in 30 words or less, even though she seemed completely out of my league, we made a perfect match. We dated for 4.5 years before I finally popped the question to her, resulting in her bursting into tears screaming yes when I dropped to one knee while at a friend's barbecue, holding out the engagement ring that I had secretly bought. A half a year of planning later, and the two of us officially became husband and wife. As part of our honeymoon, I decided for us to spend it in a place we'd both wanted desperately to visit, but never had a chance. Las Vegas. Neither of us really did any research on the city, deciding to wing it by driving the day after our wedding from our home in Washington to Nevada. The only thing we did look up was a hotel booking, getting a room at a place called the Venetian. But unfortunately, we left too late, and instead of arriving in the city at dusk, we arrived in the middle of the night. According to the orange glow of my 7 Series clock, it was approaching 3 a.m. Paula clicked on the dome light and studied the map in her lap, tracing the route with one finger while slowly winding her platinum blonde hair around the finger of her other hand. It looks like, from the road signs, we'll be coming into the city from the southwest. So, just keep going straight on Vegas Boulevard and it'll take us right there, she declared before putting the map away. We could already see the bright white glow of the city lights ahead of us, and a few minutes later, we passed by the world-famous "Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas" sign. As it disappeared behind us, I began grinning like an idiot, seeing out of the corner of my eye that Paula was smiling as well. See? Told you it was a good idea to come out on Vegas Boulevard instead of the highway, I said, to which she gave my shoulder a playful shove. Yeah, you're right again. Now let's just find our hotel so we can check in and get some sleep. I'm into that statement, babe, I thought. A minute later, and a mixture of confusion and irritation washed over me. I let out a sigh. What's wrong, darling? My wife asked, as we came to a stop at a red light. I gestured ahead of us. Honestly, sweetheart, I have no frickin' idea where we're going. Might have made a mistake by not researching exactly what all the hotels were named and where they are on the strip because I'm completely frickin' lost. And to make matters worse, I'm getting more tired by the minute. As if my words had triggered it, I let out a massive yawn. I put my head on my hands and waited for the light to turn green. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I shot a look at Paula, who was gently biting her lip. A trademark sign that she was thinking. Finally, she spoke. Look, it's extremely late right now. Why don't we just randomly pick a hotel to stay at for the night, and tomorrow we'll find the Venetian, and then we'll check in there. What can it hurt, right? I turned her words over in my head for a moment. She had a point. I booked our stay for 2 weeks with a 48-hour grace period for check-in. Staying somewhere else for one night would be okay. All right, sounds like a plan. I gestured ahead of us, putting on a regal accent. So, since you were the one to come up with the plan, Mrs. Clements, how about you pick our stay for the night? The corner of her mouth turned up in an amusing smirk. Why, certainly, Mr. Clements, she retorted as the light turned green and I continued on. Surprisingly, I didn't see many other cars on the road, even though I knew most of the city was open 24/7. Well, can't expect everyone to be up all the time. My thoughts were broken through by Paula's voice. What about that one? She asked, pointing at a rather unique and honestly neat sign appearing ahead on the left. That sign looks really neat and old school, she added, almost as if reading my thoughts. I leaned down slightly to get a better view of it. It wasn't a hotel and casino I'd ever heard of, but I shrugged my shoulders. Why not? I said. Looks about as good as anything else. Turning into the cutoff, I looked left and right, and then crossed the street and pulled into the driveway which led to the hotel's entrance. Driving in under the orange lights of the awning, I brought the car to a stop. Through the window, I saw what looked like a valet and bellhop jump to attention from by their posts and hurry over to us. I let out a soft laugh. Looks like they didn't expect anyone else coming in tonight. That's when I felt a small wave of puzzlement wash over me. Both men, who appeared to be in their early to mid-20s, were still walking towards us, but they were looking at my car with an odd expression, one which I can still recall perfectly, all these months later. I could see them quickly muttering to each other as they approached us, pointing and shrugging. The heck about my car had them so, I don't know, off? It's nothing more than a BMW 7 Series from 1995. I pushed the thought away. These people were probably used to much newer, much more expensive luxury cars. Seeing one as old as mine was probably a surprise. Well, no time like the present, I said, as I shut the car off and pulled the keys from the ignition, turning to look at Paula. She nodded, and we both pulled our respective door handles, pushing them open, stepping out into the night. The rather chilly air caught me off guard, and I flipped up the collar of my jacket to protect my neck. Hello, sir, and welcome, came a young man's voice. I turned to see the valet striding across the back of the car, his prior odd expression gone and replaced by the traditional professional smile. I returned it with a smile of my own. Thanks very much. Apologies if you didn't expect anyone coming so late. He waved away my apology. It's quite all right, sir. Used to people arriving at all hours of the day and night. He gestured to the car's trunk. Can the bellhop assist you with you and your wife's bags? I nodded, aiming the keys to the trunk and hitting the trunk release button. Obediently, and with a small squeak of protest from the aging hinges, the lid rose up, presenting our bags to the bellhop. For a moment, the same odd, almost surprised expression caught his face as he stared at the open trunk. Then, same as the valet, it was replaced with a professional smile. He reached in, pulled out the 2 suitcases, placing them on his cart, and closed the trunk before beginning the walk towards the entrance. I shot a look over the roof of the car to see if Paula had caught it as well. The expression on her face told me that she did, and she gave me a puzzled look back. I shrugged my shoulders, and then turned to the valet, who stood waiting patiently. I shook my head, snorting softly. Sorry, here, I said, feeling a little sheepish and handing him the keys. He nodded, handing me a valet stub to retrieve my car before climbing behind the wheel. For a few moments, he simply sat in the driver's seat. I was just about to knock on the window and ask if everything was all right when I heard the engine start, and the car pulled away. Stepping next to my wife, I looked at her and shook my head slowly as our eyes met. "Okay, what the hell was that all about?" I asked quietly. She shook her head as well. "I honestly don't know. Maybe it's just how the place is late at night. Anyway, it's late. Let's just check in and get up to our room. We can figure out the weirdness tomorrow." Nodding in agreement, I let her lead the way. We just pushed open the doors and stepped inside when a thought flared into my mind. "Shit," I hissed, stopping dead in my tracks. Paula turned to me, a look of concern on her face. "What is it?" she asked, reaching out and putting a hand on my shoulder. "I left my damn phone charger plugged in the cigarette lighter," I said. She let out a small laugh at my words, arching an eyebrow. "That's all? Let's get it tomorrow." I shook my head, pulling my phone out and clicking the button to bring the screen up. Can't. Only got 10% of juice left in the battery. For a moment, I debated what to do. "Look, go on ahead of me to the lobby and start the check-in," I said, gesturing towards the end of the hall where I could see the bellhop waiting for our bags. "I'm just gonna double back and grab it. It won't be long." She shot me a slightly exasperated look, but nodded and turned away. "Fine, just don't take too long, okay?" she said over her shoulder as she walked towards the lobby. "I promise I won't," I called, then turned and headed back out the main doors into the night. The wind once more smacked me in the face as I emerged under the entrance lights. I looked around, trying to figure out where the valet had parked my car. I decided to wait by the stand that he'd been stationed at and leaned against it, waiting for him to return. And after a few minutes, I glanced at my watch, noting with a slight pang of irritation that 10 minutes had passed. Paula was likely standing next to the check-in counter right now, tapping her foot in the way that she always did when she began to get pissed off. Didn't want to show it. I turned to look out the other entrance, noting that due to the bright lights above, I couldn't really see out into the darkness. That was when the feeling came over me. It sent an electric bolt of lightning up my spine, and as I'd grown up with more than a bit of a rough crowd, it was one that my sense of survival knew well. It was the feeling of being watched. Feeling every muscle in my body tense, I slowly turned and looked behind me, but nobody was there. The feeling persisted, though. Cameras, maybe? I always got that sensation when someone was staring at me through CCTV, even though I couldn't figure out how or why, and I knew that I was being observed. But as I swept my gaze in the usual areas where I figured cameras would be, I saw none. Either whoever owns this place has an expert in hiding security cameras, or they have none out here. Gutsy move in a city like this. Now the feeling of being watched began to be crept up by something else. It wasn't exactly what you would call fear or dread, more like an intense uneasiness. Not being able to see who or what was looking at me was a feeling I didn't like. It made me feel vulnerable as anything, especially because I had grown to be able to interpret my gut feelings, and this one was telling me that who or whatever was watching me wasn't exactly the friendly type. Scrape. The sound made me go rigid as a statue. Every one of my 5 senses instinctively flashed on full alert. For a moment there was silence, only broken by the distant sound of a police siren starting up somewhere. I began to relax. "You're just hearing things, Danny," I chided myself. Scrape. Now that one I hadn't imagined. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I looked around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. But I couldn't see a damn thing beyond the lights. My heart began to beat a little harder, and I glanced back at the entrance doors. Okay. Maybe time to forget the charger for the night and just go back inside. I took a single step towards the entrance. A hand fell upon my shoulder from behind, heavy and cold. "Shit!" I involuntarily cried out, jumping about a foot off the ground. I whirled around, my fist already balled up and ready to sock whoever had snuck up on me in the face. Instead, I was met with the startled face of the valet as he took a step back. For a moment, we both stood still, then I finally let out a shaky breath. "Frickin' hell, man," I muttered, running a hand over my face. "Please don't sneak up on me like that." I let out a soft laugh, trying to ease the tension which had built up inside of me. The poor man looked apologetic, raised his hands. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize you didn't hear me coming up behind you. Forgive me." I let out another soft chuckle, raising one hand and waving it to show all was forgiven, as I bent down and put my hands on my knees to steady myself. After catching my breath, I looked up. "It's quite all right," I said simply. He nodded. "Was there anything I can help you with? Did you come back out to ask a question?" The task at hand flooded back to the forefront of my mind, and I nodded. "Yeah, actually, I left something rather important in my car. I forgot to grab it before getting out. Can I possibly have the key back? Quickly go get it, and I'll just return it when I come back?" He nodded, his smile returning. "Of course, sir. Here you are," he said, holding out my keys that he still held in his hand, now adorned with a small tag with a number written on it. I took it and managed a small smile. Which direction did you park it in?" I asked, gesturing out into the dark. He let out a soft laugh of his own and shook his head. "Of course, my mistake, sir." He walked to a stand and pulled a small map of the hotel's large parking lot from behind it, pointing to a space near the far right edge. "You're parked over here." I quickly examined the map, making a mental note of the route in my mind, and then nodding at the man. "Thanks, I'll be right back." And with that, I set off. For a moment, I hesitated at the edge of the lights, staring out into the dark and remembering both the feeling and the sound. "I got a freaking grip, dude. It was a damn valet, nothing else," I muttered softly to myself, and shot a look back over my shoulder. I felt another odd sensation shoot through me as I saw he was staring after me. The same peculiar expression adorning his face, one I couldn't place. Deciding to get it over with so I could just get away from him, I took a breath and strode out into the dark. As soon as I was out of sight of the valet, I began to relax. I shook my head and laughed at how jumpy I was. My father had been a prison guard, and therefore had prepared me for anything, and I'd grown up in a less than stellar neighborhood, so why was I so jumpy in the middle of a populated city? I chalked it up to nasty stories about what happened to people from the country that visited cities and kept going. The darkened shapes of parked cars passed by me on all sides, too dark for me to make out any distinguishing features. Still, I kept walking, keeping the map of the lot at the forefront of my mind. I stopped, realizing how stupid I was being. All I had to do was tap a button on my key and I'd instantly know where it was. Snorting at my sudden lack of common sense, I raised the key and clicked the button. Beep! A few hundred feet ahead of me, I saw the lights of my BMW flash like a lighthouse out in the night. Moving quickly, I jogged the distance to the car and walked around to the driver's door. Opening it, I dropped into the driver's seat for a moment. "There you are, you little devil," I said, as I pulled the charger from the outlet, grabbed the wall adapter, and slid both into my jacket pocket. Stepping back out of the car, I began to shut the door, but something caught my eye. I let out a low whistle. "Damn," I whispered to myself as I caught sight of the car I was parked next to. A 1957 Ford Fairlane. Someone staying here had good taste. I admired the two-tone paint job for a moment longer and then slammed my car door shut, plunging the lot back in the darkness. Regardless of how much I wanted to examine further, my wife was waiting for me. I stepped around to the front of the car and clicked the lock button. The car beeped twice, signaling the alarm was activated, and the headlights flashed again for a moment. As they did, I caught sight of the car directly across from me. Another classic car, looking like an Impala from the early 60s. I allowed myself a small smile. Maybe there's a classic car show happening here soon. A thought cheered me up somewhat. I loved classic cars, and being able to attend such an event would be a perfect addition to my honeymoon. But then, all thoughts were wiped away as in that same moment, my headlights revealed something else. What appeared to be the darkened shape of a man stood just beyond the reach of the lights, standing a little ways behind the Impala. Instantly, I started. I hadn't heard anyone walking around during my trip to the car, and I'm someone who has ears like a hawk. It was rare, if ever, for me to fail to notice anyone else around. This fact made me even more on edge. As my car's headlights died away, the area was plunged again into darkness. For a moment, I didn't move or say anything. Then, I cleared my throat. Hello? There was no reply, but I could still barely see the figure. I decided to try speaking again. Can I help you with anything, man? Still, the figure stayed silent. Now I began to feel alarm bells going off in my head, and I brought myself to my full height, trying to sound as intimidating as possible. Look, man, I don't want any trouble, but, I have no problem defending myself if I have to. So find someone else to go try and rob or something. The silence seemed almost deafening, as the seconds drew on with no answer and no movement. Okay, fuck this, I muttered, then aimed the key behind me in my car, pressing the unlock button again. The car beeped, and the headlights came on again, illuminating the Impala in front of me and the surrounding area. I felt a pang of surprise, almost shock, shoot through me. What the... The figure was gone. I hadn't turned away for more than a split second to make sure that I was aiming the key correctly. There wasn't enough time for someone to book it, and yet the area behind the parked car was empty. I felt my pulse begin to race as I looked around, trying to see into the darkness beyond the headlights, but I couldn't see a damn thing. The headlights died away again, allowing the blackness to return. For a few seconds, there was silence. Scrape. I spun around. The sound almost seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It came again. Scrape. The same sound that I'd heard while waiting for the valet to return. I'd come to the conclusion that it had been him simply dragging his feet along the ground, but now I began to think it had been something else. The sound came again, almost seeming closer. My breath was coming fast and shallow now, my mind suddenly screaming at me to hit the button on my keys again. Thrusting my arm out, I jammed my finger down on the lock button. Beep, beep. The headlights flashed on again, and I almost leapt backwards. The figure was back, standing just beyond the edge of the lights to the right, standing in between me and my way back to the hotel. Oh, fuck. I suddenly gripped the keys tightly in my fist, remembering the trick my father had taught me, how to use it as a weapon. The figure stayed still and silent as it had before. I pulled in several lungfuls of air before finally finding my voice. "What the fuck do you want?" Just as before, I got no answer. But for a second, I thought I heard something. Something that almost sounded like a whisper or a mutter coming from the direction of the figure. It seemed almost muffled, just like someone would if they were wearing a mask or a balaclava to hide their face. "Shit," I whispered. The notion of having to fight off an attacker was looking more and more probable by the second. It was a notion I was not a fan of, especially one as highly skilled as this one seemed to be, to move around so silently and quickly. Then it moved. I couldn't see what it did, but I saw something fly through the air and land with a clink somewhere near me. I felt like an idiot to this day for what I did, but I foolishly took my eyes off the figure seemingly on instinct to see what had been thrown my way, and by the time I realized my mistake and snapped my head back up, the figure had disappeared again. My eyes widened as I swung around trying to figure where he'd zoomed off to. But I saw nothing. The sound of a car passing by on the street grabbed my attention, and I quickly looked over to see a pair of headlights and taillights pass by the hotel on the main drag. The BMW's headlights clicked off again, plunging me back into darkness and causing my heart to begin pounding again. Where the fuck is he? Almost as if in answer, the sound, which had by now begun to fill me with a sense of dread, returned. Scrape! Just as before, I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I quickly shot a glance at the hotel, where I could see the glowing lights of the entrance area. It looked like heaven, with me sitting out in the middle of purgatory here, being stalked by God only knew who. I decided to call out one final time, though I doubted it'd deter the dude at this point. "This is your last warning, fuckface. You come at me, and I'll put you in the fucking ground. Now fuck off!" As soon as the final word had left my lips, all sound ceased. The scraping sound stopped, and silence fell over the parking lot. But it wasn't a normal silence, as if the person had heeded my warning and split. It was a deadly silence, one which was so tension-filled. It was almost palpable. Instantly, I realized I'd made a huge mistake with my threat. Oh, shit, I whispered under my breath. As I looked around, I couldn't hear a damn thing, and standing in the darkness for this long was making me feel more vulnerable by the second. My breath was hitching in my throat, and I felt the first tendrils of genuine fear creep on me. I wanted to make a break for it and dash for the entrance, but where I didn't know where the figure was, I didn't want to blindly run straight into him. So I made a split-second decision. I would hit the lock button on my keys one final time to make sure they weren't still off to my right. If I didn't see them, I would book it and not look back. I swallowed hard, realizing my throat had gone as dry as sandpaper without realizing it. Slowly, I raised the key back up, pointing it towards my car. My heart was now thundering in my chest, as if I'd just run a marathon, and for a moment, I hesitated. Then I hit the button. The car beeped, and the headlights pierced the black veil, banishing it away. I steeled myself and looked to the right, expecting the figure to be there again, but instead, I saw nothing. For a second, I stared out, trying to see any minute detail, but the figure was gone. I let off a shuddering breath. For a moment, a shred of relief passed through me as I thought that they had heeded my threat and took off, and that's when the realization slammed into me. I had left my back completely exposed. Fuck my life. In that moment, the feeling of being watched returned along with the dread, and I whirled around to face the other way, but I only got halfway when I was slammed into. The impact lifted me off my feet and sent me flying through the air before slamming onto the side of a parked car. Before my brain had a chance to catch up, I felt myself being grabbed and flung to the ground. The pavement slammed into my shoulder, but my instincts had now kicked in. I flipped myself onto my back and looked up to see the figure falling towards me, one arm outstretched. I rolled myself hard to the left and with no momentum to spare. I heard the sound of something heavy slam into the concrete. Hard enough, I swear I heard it crack. The guy just tried bashing my head in. Scrambling to my feet, I saw them do the same, squaring their shoulders to charge me again. Realizing I didn't have the advantage in this fight, I did the only smart thing I knew to do. I turned and sprinted for the hotel's entrance. The darkened shape of parked cars flew by me in a blur as I ran, my ragged breaths seeming to echo back at me. My lungs began to feel as though they were on fire, a consequence of not working out much in the last few months. But I kept running. I could hear my pursuer behind me, and to my dismay, they were rapidly gaining. Their footfalls seemed even louder than my own, as I could hear them more clearly. The entrance was just in front of me now, and not even 100 feet away, I felt something brush against my back. Either I'd almost been grabbed or my attacker had just taken a swing at me with his weapon while running. The realization that they were that close sent a new burst of adrenaline through my veins, giving me a second wind and allowing me a new burst of speed. I ran faster than I had since my high school track and field days. Still, I could feel my pursuer close behind me, but I didn't dare look back. And then I burst from the darkness into the lights of the entrance. I could see the valet shoot up from where he'd drifted off behind the stand. He dashed out from behind it, running towards me. "Sir, what's the matter?" he exclaimed. I finally gathered my courage and whirled around, expecting to see someone directly behind me. But instead, I saw I was alone. Completely alone. Snapping my head around, I saw no signs of my attacker beyond the lights. What the hell? For a moment, I stood there, trying to catch my breath. Then I turned to the valet. I was attacked by someone. I choked out between gasps of air. Someone tried attacking me while I was at my car. Instantly, I saw the valet's eyes harden. He turned and ran back to his stand, pulling a corded phone handset from behind it. I realized it must have connected him to the inside. He spoke into it for a moment and then hung up. Not even a minute later, a large, burly man wearing a security uniform jogged out of the entrance. "Stay here, sir," he said to me, as he and the valet jogged past into the dark. "Be careful!" I called after them. And then I was alone again. I didn't dare leave the seeming safety of the lighted area, and instead stood by the valet stand for them to return. As the minutes dragged on, terrible thoughts tore through my mind. Thoughts of the two men being ambushed and knocked out. Or worse. A few minutes later, though, the two men returned. The security guard shook his head at me. "Whoever it was, sir, they're gone." His words disheartened me somewhat. In my mind, I knew they'd long since been vamoosed, but part of me hoped he'd been caught skulking around in another car. I let out a sigh and nodded. "So now what?" I asked, still trying to return my breath to normal. The guy shrugged. "I'll call the police in the morning, make a report. Until then, there's nothing we can do." The valet spoke up. "I spoke to the concierge in the lobby. They're going to bump you up to one of our vacant premier suites, as a way to apologize for this incident." He gestured towards the entrance. "Your wife's waiting for you by the check-in desk. Head on inside, put this out of your mind. I don't think you'll be troubled again during your stay." He flashed me a perfectly white smile, and for a moment I stood there, felt flabbergasted at how calmly both men were taking the situation. Then I reminded myself, it's Las Vegas, Danny. Shit probably happens on the regular here. Even still, my mental words did little to comfort me. Despite the valet's words, something inside me silently whispered that it wasn't the end of it. Then I shook my head. I was letting the attack, however horrifying and terrible, cloud my judgment. For a moment, I'd almost allowed myself to think that this entire hotel felt off, wrong, that something about it just didn't gel. But I rationalized that it was all due to my experience. Besides, they're bumping us up to one of the luxury suites. Can't be that bad. Especially when you were going to stay in an economy suite in the other place. Feeling satisfied with my own conclusion, I nodded at the valet and handed back my keys. Making sure I still had the paper slip in my pocket, I followed the guard back inside. The warm, old-school style decor seemed to put me at ease as I walked from the entrance hall into the lobby itself. Older-style places always had that effect on me. As I approached the check-in desk, my mind turned over the possibility of canceling my other reservation and simply making this place where Paula and I would stay for the entire duration of our honeymoon. Speaking of Paula, my wife stood by the check-in desk, turning to me with a worried look. I'm pretty sure she found out what happened, I thought. I'd been churning over the idea of simply not telling her about the attack, but it seemed the choice was out of my hands. She ran to me, cupped my face in both of her hands. "Darling, are you all right?" she asked, her voice carrying a trace of desperation in it. I took a second, then locked eyes with her and nodded. Yeah, I'm all right." I looked harder at her. "I take it you heard what happened to me?" She nodded. The man here picked up the phone. A look of relief crossed her face. "Oh, Danny, I'm just glad you're okay," she said, giving me a quick hug. I refrained from telling her exactly how close I'd come to not being okay. "I am too," I admitted. "I'm just glad we didn't start out both 2023 and our honeymoon with me in the hospital. It sucked trying to woo you from a hospital bed or a wheelchair." She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head at my joke. I leaned forward and kissed her on the forehead. "Come on," I said softly. "Let's check in and get up to our room. You both need the rest." She nodded, and I glanced at my watch. It was close to 4 a.m. I approached the check-in, the man standing behind it, looking up and giving an award-winning smile. "Glad to see you're all right, sir," he said, his voice containing what seemed like genuine empathy, and it cemented my idea further to propose to stay our entire trip here. "Thanks very much for saying so," I replied. He nodded. "Of course, sir. And in addition to bumping you up to a premier suite as compensation, please allow us to provide you with a few sets of tickets for you and your lovely wife, both to see shows going on right here in our hotel and in the city itself, as our way to apologize." Paul and I exchanged a rather surprised but happy look. Maybe it might have started out on a bad note, I thought. But at this pace, this is shaping up to be a better honeymoon than I thought. Paula smiled at me. Thank you ever so much, sir, she said, gripping my arm. You see, my husband and I, we just got married, and this is our honeymoon. The smile, almost wider than I'd ever seen someone give, crossed the man's face. He held out both of his arms. Then, my dear, I bid congratulations to you and to your lucky husband. He gestured all around him. And I bid you both welcome. Welcome to the Dunes Hotel and Casino. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast, wherever you happen to do that. So if it's like on YouTube, then you're probably, watching the video, but if it's on, not, then you're probably listening to the podcast, like with Spotify or with Apple or something like that. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me over at Patreon. That's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. I cannot thank you guys enough. Thank you guys so much for being supporters. That goes for everybody who was down in the description, as well as AcidSystem, BallarmsTheRat, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, Chainsmoker Dealer, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, Cronut508, CrusaderChocobo, CursepoxPrimarch, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Diana Kraus, Ellie Hutmire, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Gemma Halsey, HIDive's nephew, himbojerry, Hour Minute Seconds Time, Jay Keems, Jed is Pet, Jordan Humble, King Crab, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Old Penguin, Peaceful Buddha, Psychomel, Red Shadowcat, Remember the Sun, Rinku Star, Salty Surprise, Samara Line, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sullyman, Charlie Sue, the Chavez Brothers. Thank you so much. And honestly, thank you to everybody, even those guys that are in there for just $1. It really helps me out. Once again, that's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Or if you guys like to just listen, honestly, it helps me out a lot too. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And sweet dreams.